Hey, welcome to this first video where I'm going to be discussing stage 1 of the remote viewing process, a little bit more in depth than I have in the past. So if you're unfamiliar with remote viewing methods or how to actually apply a specific technique, you need to start with that if you ever want to start applying in financial markets. So in this video, I'm going to be showing you what that first step looks like more in depth. And if you're interested in kind of understanding a little bit where this comes from and you want to read a little bit up on it, I highly recommend Rene Workelier's book, Mind to Mind. In it, he discusses a lot of his outbounder experiments where this first step came from, which is called producing an ideogram. So I'm going to show you how I apply it. And from here, there's going to be a couple other videos that come afterwards in the coming weeks that will be available to the members of my private Facebook group. So keep an eye out for those. That'll involve stage 2, stage 3, and then eventually stage 4. But we need to start with the beginning, and that's what I'm going to show with you in this video. So let's dive in here. Now, before you can begin a remote viewing session, you need a tasking. Someone needs to have set something up for you, and whether they've associated a set of random numbers or they've just told you, hey, I've set up a task for you, go view it. I mean, it actually does work. The way I prefer to set up tasks is with randomly generated numbers or strings of numbers, simply because I can just say, send an email to a viewer and say, run this for me. Here's the number. I have set something up for it. Just perceive what you perceive by going through the structured technique. So whenever I do this, the first step always includes what's called a reference number. And what do these look like? I mean, it's just a string of random numbers. Something as simple as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 could be a reference number. You could also use letters in that as well, but it really doesn't matter. But it's kind of important that you don't use the same reference number for two different types of tasks. You know, if I use this number and apply it to the Eiffel Tower, and I use the number and then I decide to go print it out on another sheet of paper with, I don't know, a race car. Now I have two different tasks with the same number, and there's going to be a lot of bleed through between both if you actually try to run it. So these need to be unique. So every time I give someone a number, it will have a unique task associated with it. But how do we use these reference numbers to prompt our unconscious mind for information, for spontaneous impressions? Well, this is where we need to deal with stage 1. And so you'll have a task reference number. And what we're going to be doing, I'm going to be showing you here, is creating an ideogram and then decoding that said ideogram. And what is an ideogram? Well, let me show you. First, what you do is you write out your task, your reference number. And then as soon as you finish writing it, you immediately create a spontaneous line form on the page. It's like imagine like a bolt of electricity is traveling down your arm, and in like half a second, you create a spontaneous mark on the page. Here's what that looks like. I'm just gonna use the same number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, ideogram. And so this is an example of a spontaneous ideogram. It's very quick. It's a reflexive mark after you write down your prompt, whatever that prompt may be. In this case, it was just a series of numbers. Now, there's a 3-part process that you go through after you do this, after you create the ideogram, and this is called the decoding process. The very first part is referred to as the motion. We're decoding the motion that was created that occurred when this ideogram was created. And people have different techniques on how to do this. There's one that I prefer. Some people like to kind of touch the ideogram along the way and just kind of, oh, what's going on with this part? Personally, I don't like that method. What I use is I actually, in the air above the ideogram, I retrace it. And so here, there's a list, and I'm gonna have it included with this video. There's a list of words that we typically like to use or phrases to describe the motion of this ideogram. So I know it started here. So here's where I'm gonna start. And I'm just gonna start describing. I'm gonna place my attention on what the motion of this was. So here, I'm at this corner right here, and my arm first spontaneously just went down, diagonal down. That's exactly what happened. So I just write diagonal down. Okay, so what's next? So again, I'm right above it. You know, I'm like usually right above the page around here, just kind of like mimicking what the actual motion was. So it went diagonal down, and what do I have? Well, I have a curving under going on right here. So it just feels correct to me to describe it that way. It's right, curving under. Okay. What's next? Well, next my arm moved upwards. So at a diagonal, so instead of diagonal down, we have a diagonal up. Diagonal up. And here we have a curving above. Then we have a kind of a diagonal curving down. Diagonal curving down. Once we're here, feels still this here we went kind of back diagonal up. So diagonal up. And then as soon as I kind of trace this last part of the ideogram that showed up, I feel like a little bit like I'm curving above again. I'm sure there's other words and phrases you could use to describe this. It just comes into my mind spontaneously as I'm kind of prompting myself for what motion is actually going on here. And so I have a curving above again. And then finally, this last part, it's just like a diagonal curving down. Diagonal curving down. So this is the very first part of the decoding process, is you want to go back and put your full attention on the motion that your arm took, the journey that the pen took across the page to create this ideogram and describe that motion. If you will, this is kind of like, if you think about it, when you're really zoomed in, when you're putting all of your perception on one thing, everything else that's around it kind of fades away. And this is really what this will begin to do in the decoding process, is you have to really put your perception, well, what's going on here? And what that's telling your unconscious mind is, hey, this is important, give me more information about it. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's kind of the simple reason of why we begin doing this, is we're communicating internally, this is important, give me more information about what I'm focusing on. What you focus on is where the mind goes. And so that's what we do, is we describe the motion that our arm made, making the ideogram. So that's part one of decoding. Part two is the feeling. And what I mean by feeling is I don't mean necessarily an emotional feeling. What I mean is more a textural feeling, is that if you were to take your hand and run it, put it into the site, if you will, whatever that site is, whether it's a mountain range, an animal, whatever it is, if you put your hand into it, what would you texturally feel on that surface of your hand? And so sometimes, certainly there's some viewers, what they actually do is they'll actually take their hand, usually their opposite hand, not their writing hand, and they'll actually kind of just feel the ideogram. And they'll imagine that they're kind of kinesthetically pushing their hand through the ideogram to whatever is associated with, and then perceiving whatever spontaneously arises in their mind as an impression about the feeling. Like, oh, is this soft? Is this hard? Is this metallic? Is this, fuzzy? What is it? What is the very first, and we only want one word here, but what is the first feeling, descriptive word that arises in your mind when you prompt yourself for that information? And you can also, you don't always have to take your left hand. People have different methods. It's whatever works best for you. Sometimes I'll kind of do this, but usually what I'm doing is I'll just, again, start retracing the actual line form on the page, and then just kind of going internally and saying, okay, what is the spontaneous impression that arises in my mind about how this feels? And for me, as I'm doing this right now, and this isn't actually associated with anything, so it's just showing you the technique, is it feels hard, like stony hard. So I'll just write hard here. You just really want one word. So that's getting the feeling of the ideogram. Final part is we want what's called the gestalt. And by gestalt, what I mean is, what is the big picture? What is the broad overarching idea that's associated with whatever this points to? And again, you can't know this consciously. All of this feeling and the gestalt are things that come to you spontaneously. They kind of percolate up into your awareness, and you just capture it by writing it down. But you asked yourself the question. You asked yourself, hey, give me an answer about what is the big idea associated with this ideogram. And For practicing sake, there's obviously many more gestalts than just these three, but for complete beginners, what you begin practicing with are three primary gestalts. And these gestalts are land, water, and structure. And so after this video, I'm going to actually be setting up a couple practice targets for the group and anyone who watches this to begin practicing this method. You'll end here right after decoding the ideogram, and then you can check your feedback. How close were you? Was your overall feeling correct? Was your overall gestalt correct? Was it land? Was it structure? Was it water? And so you can take your hand again and you say, well, I should be, what does my hand tell me? Or you can do the thing where I kind of hover, I recreate the ideogram in the air, and I just say, okay, well, what's the gestalt? What's the big idea? I'll just keep recreating the ideogram here in the air, and it's whatever wants to come up in my mind that's spontaneous. What I'm getting right now is just structure. So that's what I got spontaneously. I write it down, structure. And that is the end of stage one. This is the handshake with the site. And so really, if you kind of think about it, what you're doing here is all the other distractions in your environment, other thoughts, ideas in your mind, all of that's kind of getting pushed to the side, and your perception, your attention is going to this ideogram. And this ideogram is a reflexive mark that encapsulates whatever is associated with this reference number, usually a photograph. It doesn't have to be, obviously in other taskings, it's not always a photograph, it can be something else. But this is the zip file, if you will. This ideogram is a zip file that should contain all of the information that you'll need to describe and perceive what's there. And so, but you need to make a connection. You need to grab that signal line and start the session, and this is how you do it. So there's certainly other ways, other techniques. There's no shortage of ways to do this. This is simply the way that I do it. And I'll have some practice targets for you to do a number of these. I recommend doing, a couple of these a day for about a week, 2 weeks, get feedback, check your results. And once you start getting this piece of information right here, the gestalt, correct, that would be appropriate to then to start moving on more in depth with stage 2, stage 3, and then ultimately stage 4. So I hope this video was helpful. There will be more coming soon. If you'd like access to those, definitely sign up to the Facebook group that I have going, which is Remote Viewing Financial Markets with Brett Stewart. And I will see you in the next one. Cheers.